The wedding lights still glimmered faintly against the darkening sky when we finally stepped outside. Music thudded behind us, muffled by laughter and the rustle of silk dresses. It had been a long day, endless photographs, small talk with relatives I barely remembered, and smiles that felt rehearsed. Yet beneath the noise, a quiet ache followed me, something I hadn't named until tonight. My friend Samir walked beside me, a half-finished soda in hand, still humming the tune the band had played. "You looked half dead out there," he teased, bumping my shoulder. "I was just tired," I lied. In truth, the celebration had reminded me how distant I felt from everything lately, my work, my partner, even myself. Inside the guesthouse courtyard, strings of fairy lights fluttered like lazy fireflies. I could smell cardamom tea from the kitchen and hear someone laughing upstairs. That's when Arif, Samir's cousin, appeared at the doorway, tall, quiet, wearing a plain white kurta that made the world around him seem loud. I had seen him earlier during the wedding, standing apart, his eyes absorbing everything but giving nothing away. When he smiled at me now, it was small and polite, but it landed somewhere deeper than politeness should reach. "Still awake?" he asked softly, trying to be. I answered that. He nodded, that half-smile returning. "Big weddings drain the soul." Samir clapped him on the back. "Ignore him, Arif. He hates crowds. He'd marry his laptop if he could." They both laughed, and for a moment, I almost joined in. But something in Arif's eyes, curious, steady, kept me still. It wasn't attraction yet, it was recognition, like finding a quiet echo in a noisy room. The evening carried us into late-night tea and lazy conversation. Relatives drifted away to their rooms. The lights dimmed, leaving only the yellow glow from the porch. Samir told stories from childhood, mostly to make Arif laugh, and I found myself watching how his cousin listened, never interrupting, just absorbing every word with attention so complete it felt like a compliment. When the laughter subsided, Samir yawned and stretched. "All right, I'm dead. Arif, you're in my room tonight." Arif looked uncertain. "You sure? There's space here, isn't there?" Samir waved a dismissive hand. "You'll be fine with me." Then turning to me, "Unless you want to host him." He meant it as a joke, but Arif's glance toward me lingered a moment too long before he looked away. The air seemed to shift slightly, nothing obvious, but enough to notice. Samir disappeared down the corridor, muttering something about misplaced blankets, leaving the two of us standing in the half-lit hall. For a second, neither spoke. "You don't talk much," I said finally. "I talk when there's something worth saying," he replied, his tone neither defensive nor proud, just factual. "You." "Maybe I talk too much," I admitted. "It hides things." He looked at me then, the faintest crease between his brows. "Like what?" The question caught me off guard. "Like loneliness, maybe." Silence again, but this time it felt shared. The laughter from other rooms faded, the night settled between us like a fragile secret that we ended up on the terrace, drawn by the cool air. The moon hung low, soft against the hum of distant music. Arif leaned against the railing, the wind tugging lightly at his sleeves. "It's strange," he said, his voice quiet enough that I had to lean closer to hear. "How a room full of people can still feel empty." I wanted to ask what he meant, but I already knew. His words described my entire week, my entire year. There was something about him, his calm, his clarity, that made honesty feel safe. "I know that feeling," I said. That he turned toward me. "Then we're both lost in the same crowd." The sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. I told myself it was harmless, just conversation between two people too awake for sleep. But somewhere deep inside, I sensed the beginnings of something unplanned. When Samir called from the hallway, the spell broke. Arif smiled faintly, murmured goodnight, and followed his cousin into the dark. I stood there, watching the last trace of white fabric disappear behind the door, feeling a pull I couldn't name. Back in my room, the silence felt heavier than usual. The laughter downstairs had faded, and even the lights seemed tired. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the ceiling fan turn slow circles, replaying the evening in fragments, his voice, his smile, the way he looked at me as if he understood everything I hadn't said. Something had shifted, quietly but unmistakably, and as the first hints of dawn touched the window, I realized the truth I didn't want to face. I wanted to see him again. The next day drifted by in slow fragments of noise and color. Morning chatter echoed through the courtyard, teacups clinked, and children chased one another between rows of empty chairs. The wedding was officially over, yet a sleepy warmth still lingered in the air. That I helped Samir pack decorations while pretending not to search for Arif among the people moving in and out of rooms. Each time the door creaked, a pulse of expectation struck before reason caught up. When I finally saw him, standing near the gate, sunlight on his face, it felt like the day exhaled. He lifted his gaze and smiled, a brief acknowledgement that said everything and nothing at once. That we didn't speak much until afternoon, when the families began to leave. Luggage was carried out, goodbyes traded, promises of reunion thrown around like confetti. By evening, the guest house had quieted again, now holding only a few of us. Samir was to leave early in the morning, while Arif had one more night before his train. After dinner, the air grew colder. The laughter had gone, only the hum of crickets remained. Samir yawned as we stacked plates in the sink. Tomorrow's travel day, he said, stretching. I'll crash early. Arif, you can take my room tonight. He gestured to me, sleeps like a rock anyway. Arif hesitated. Maybe I'll stay up a bit. Not sleepy yet. Samir shrugged, too tired to care, and wandered off. The house dimmed behind him, leaving only the terrace light and a faint orange glow from the street. Arif turned toward me with an uncertain smile. Mind some company? I shook my head. Not at all. We sat outside again, on the same terrace where the previous night had folded into silence. The air smelled faintly of rain. For a long while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was the kind of quiet that allowed thoughts to breathe. I've been thinking about what you said, he began finally. About loneliness. I glanced at him. And? He toyed with his ring, a small silver band on his finger. Sometimes it's not about being alone. It's about not being understood, even when someone's right beside you. The words landed like truth disguised as confession. I thought of my partner back home, the distance measured not in miles but in quiet dinners, distracted eyes, unspoken disappointment. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I asked, do you ever tell people what you really feel? Arif laughed softly. No. It's easier to listen. You're good at that. He looked at me then, steady and searching. You make it easy. The space between us thinned. I could hear the rhythm of his breathing, feel the night press close around us. When the wind moved, our shoulders almost brushed. That he said quietly, you seem, somewhere else. Maybe I'm where I shouldn't be, I admitted. A silence followed that wasn't empty. It was charged, an invisible thread pulled tighter with every passing second. He turned his head slightly, our eyes met, and the moment became still, suspended between choice and consequence. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. Tell me to stop, and I will. I didn't. It wasn't a kiss like in the movies, no sudden passion or sweeping music. It was hesitant, almost reverent, as if both of us were afraid of breaking the quiet we'd built. The warmth of it wasn't about desire, it was recognition, the startling comfort of being known without explanation. When we drew apart, the world seemed to pause. Neither of us looked away. He said nothing, and I didn't either. The sound of distant thunder rolled over the fields, and the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and uncertain. That we stayed there until the drizzle turned steady, watching the streetlights shimmer in the wet. My thoughts spiraled between guilt and wonder. This shouldn't have happened, yet part of me whispered that it was inevitable, that life had led me here to remind me I was still capable of feeling. Arif finally spoke, barely audible under the rain. Some moments aren't meant to last. They just show us who we are. I wanted to answer, but my throat felt tight. Instead, I nodded, memorizing the curve of light on his face, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. When we went back inside, we walked separately, our steps echoing down different corridors. The air smelled of damp earth and endings. I reached my room and closed the door, pressing my palms against the cool wood. Somewhere beyond it, I heard his door close too. For a long time, I stood there, caught between regret and relief, before whispering to the empty room, "Something just changed, and I don't know if I want to undo it." The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. A pale light crept through the thin curtains, touching the floor with a quiet softness. I hadn't slept. The memory of the night replayed in slow fragments: the terrace, the rain, his voice, the silence that followed. Each detail felt fragile, too delicate to touch, and yet impossible to forget. From somewhere down the hallway came the sound of movement, suitcases being dragged, doors closing, voices murmuring goodbyes. Samir was leaving early, just as he'd said. I sat up, half hoping, half dreading that Arif would knock before they went. He didn't. By the time I stepped outside, the courtyard was nearly empty. Samir spotted me first and waved. Still half asleep, he laughed. I forced a smile. Behind him, Arif stood by the gate, a small overnight bag slung over his shoulder. He was listening to someone speak, but his eyes, calm, unreadable, found mine across the distance. There was no sign of the night in his expression. No guilt, no urgency, only quiet composure. He looked like someone who had already made peace with whatever had happened. I envied that. Samir threw an arm around me. "Thanks for helping with everything. You're a lifesaver." "Anytime," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That he turned to Arif. "Say goodbye properly. He doesn't like sudden exits." Arif approached, the sound of his footsteps soft against the wet tiles. For a moment, neither of us knew how to begin. Then he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For listening." It was such a simple answer that it hurt. I shook his hand, aware of the faint tremor in mine. Samir called from the car, breaking the moment. Arif gave a small nod, stepped back, and walked away. The gate closed with a gentle click. When the car disappeared down the lane, the courtyard felt unbearably still. I stayed there long after they left, watching a stray leaf swirl in the puddle by my feet. The world had returned to order, but something inside me hadn't. Later that day, on the bus home, the countryside blurred past the window like a watercolor left out in the rain. I tried to think about work, about routine, about the ordinary things waiting for me, but all I could think about was how seen I had felt. It wasn't love, not exactly. It was a glimpse of understanding so rare that it frightened me. That I wondered if that was what infidelity really was, not the act, but the choice to let someone else touch a truth you had hidden for too long. When I reached home, my partner was waiting, smiling in that tired, familiar way. We spoke of errands, of friends, of the week ahead. Everything appeared as it should be, yet every word felt slightly out of tune. When they asked how the wedding went, I said, "It was nice," and left it there. Some things didn't need retelling, they lived better as silence. That night, lying beside them, I listened to the rhythm of their breathing. The space between us was filled with all the things I couldn't say, about the terrace, the rain, the quiet truth of another person's presence. I closed my eyes and tried to let it fade, but memories have a way of echoing long after the sound is gone. In the days that followed, Arif didn't message. I didn't either. Maybe he understood that words would only make it harder. Yet every time it rained, I thought of that night, the way his voice had blended with thunder, the calm certainty in his eyes. It wasn't longing exactly, it was remembrance, gentle and persistent. Weeks passed before Samir mentioned him again. "Arif's gone abroad," he said casually. "Work, I think." Didn't say much before leaving. I nodded, hiding the sudden weight in my chest. "He's always been quiet." "Yeah," Samir smiled. "But when he does talk, you listen." He was right. I still was. One evening, I found myself on the same terrace again, this time alone, the sky streaked with amber light. The wind carried the scent of rain from somewhere far away. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, it felt like standing on the edge of that night again. Everything still possible, everything still fragile. That I whispered into the fading light, not expecting an answer. Maybe we were just two strangers trying to remember what connection feels like. And in that whisper, there was no guilt left, only understanding. Some moments, I realized, aren't meant to become stories or confessions. They exist simply to remind us we are still capable of feeling something real. As dusk settled, I turned toward the door, carrying that quiet truth with me. The past had not vanished, but it had softened. And though the world outside had returned to its calm rhythm, a part of me would always belong to that one unguarded night when everything changed, silently, completely, and without promise of return.